Hi, this is Jennifer from Read It Again. Come sit with me while I read part 2 of the Cobble Street Cousins, A Little Shopping. Please consider subscribing, and if you enjoyed this book, hit the like button. Part 2 of the Cobble Street Cousins, A Little Shopping by Cynthia Rylant, illustrated by Wendy Anderson Halperin. "Is he green and yellow with a fancy head?" asked Rosie. "Yes," said the tiny woman. "Where is he?" Rosie pointed to an antique shop across the street. "He's on the rooster," she said. Everyone looked. Sure enough, there was Petey on the rooster weather vane above the antique shop. There was a slight breeze, and Petey was slowly spinning around and around. He seemed to be having quite a good time. "Petey!" called the tiny woman. "Petey, you come home right now!" Petey just ignored her and kept spinning. Michael looked at the cousins. "Why don't I walk over there and see if I can help coax Petey down? You girls can do your shopping and meet me when you're finished." The cousins were very reluctant to leave all the excitement outside, but they knew that Aunt Lucy would be expecting them home in an hour, and there was still ice cream to squeeze in. "Okay," said Tess, "but come in and get us if anything remarkable happens." "I promise," said Michael. He followed the tiny woman across the street, heading for Petey. The old craft shop was wonderful. There were big tables covered with dozens of little boxes of everything. "It's like a fairyland flea market," said Lily, running her hands through a box of tiny silver stars. "I love it," said Rosie. "Me too," said Tess. And they forgot all about Petey. It took the cousins about 20 minutes to find everything they needed. If they could have stayed all afternoon, they surely would have. But with several little bags of small, wonderful things, they finally stepped outside in search of Michael and Petey. Michael and the tiny woman were still standing under the weather vane, looking up, and Petey was still spinning. "Petey's having a fun day," said Rosie as the cousins joined Michael. "Petey!" called the tiny woman. "Petey, you come home right now!" "Did you get everything you need?" Michael asked the girls. "Yes, and more," said Lily. "It was wonderful. Miniature teapots and tiny wheelbarrows, and the sweetest little wicker chairs. I bought some glitter," said Tess. "I'm going to scatter it in my hair for my next performance. And I bought some beautiful silver thread to repair my bear Henry," said Rosie, digging into one of her bags. "See?" She held out a silvery spool for Michael to see. And just then, flappa, 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 peck! Petey flew down with his beak and plucked the spool of thread right out of Rosie's hand. "Eek!" squealed Rosie. "Hey!" yelled Tess. "Petey!" scolded the tiny woman. They all watched as Petey circled above their heads with his wonderful prize. And then, slowly and rather casually, he turned and flew right back into his apartment. "Yay!" clapped the cousins. "Oh, thank goodness," said the tiny woman. "You'd better run right in and close that window," said Michael. Oh, yes, the tiny woman said, hurrying away. Little girl, I'll buy you another spool of thread." "That's all right," called Michael. "No need. Happy to help." He turned to Rosie. "Let's buy another spool, Rosie," he said. "I'll pay for it." Rosie smiled. "I'd rather you pay for a chocolate fudge cone with sprinkles." Michael laughed. "Double sprinkles," he said. "Maybe even triple." Rosie took Michael's hand, and everyone walked happily to the ice cream parlor, talking, of course, of nothing but Petey. Chapter 3, Surprise. Lily, Rosie, and Tess worked secretly on Aunt Lucy's flower shop for several days. First, they cut pieces of cardboard and glued them into the shape of the building. Then, they gave the cardboard 2 thick coats of white paint. Finally, they began the fun part, decorating. Because they hadn't any color photographs of Aunt Lucy's real flower shop, the cousins sometimes forgot exactly what it looked like. When this happened, and it was daytime, one of the girls would dash down to the corner and take a look at the shop. Was the bench on the right or left side of the door? Then she would run home with the information and the girls would begin again. As they worked on the little shop, the cousins talked of all sorts of things. Whom they most admired, which books they liked best, where they wanted to take a vacation, and as always, they talked of what they wanted to be. All of this making things on a budget is good for me, said Lily, because poets are always poor. They live in tiny apartments above movie houses or cafes, and their friends all worry about them and bring them food. When I'm a poet, I'll have some practice making do. Well, said Tess, I definitely do not want to be poor, and this making do is a good reminder for me. It reminds me that when I'm a Broadway star, I want to be loaded. She gave a mischievous grin. The girls worked quietly for a moment. Then Lily asked, What about you, Rosie? Rosie looked up from the tiny chimney she was intently gluing on. Oh, she said, this reminds me that I like to play with glue. Lily and Tess giggled and giggled. Rosie said the most sensible things, but they always came out funny. Finally, by Saturday, the flower shop was finished, and the girls invited Michael over to share in their surprise. When Aunt Lucy arrived home from shopping, all 4 were sitting on the front porch. Michael, exclaimed Aunt Lucy, it's so nice to see you. Aunt Lucy was looking very pretty. Her long red hair was in a ponytail, and she wore big silver hoop earrings. The cousins could see that Michael really liked Aunt Lucy. He always turned so pink and clumsy when she showed up. Michael reached out to help Aunt Lucy with Aunt Lucy's bags and nearly dropped them. The cousins looked at each other and smiled. The girls tell me they have a surprise for you, said Michael, holding the bags and door open for Aunt Lucy. I haven't seen it, but I just hope its name isn't Petey. Rosie giggled. At least I'd get my spool of thread back, she said. Once the bags were put away and Aunt Lucy and Michael were settled on the front porch swing, the cousins had Aunt Lucy hide her eyes as they carried out the little flower shop. Then she looked. Oh my gracious, she said. It's my flower shop. Oh my goodness. The shop was glued to a flat board. Aunt Lucy picked it up and turned it around and around. Oh, you sweet girls, she said. It's beautiful. And it was. It had the blue painted window boxes and bold yellow door of Aunt Lucy's shop. It had the green park bench in front and the wishing well by the gate. It had windows that said Lucy's Flowers and a little sign that said Open. And best of all, it had Aunt Lucy. There she was, a little wooden doll with long red yarn for hair and a polka dot dress. Michael smiled at Aunt Lucy. It looks just like you, he said, and I mean that in a good way. We have one more little surprise, said Tess. She pulled something from her pocket. A Michael doll. Yikes, said Michael. The doll had Michael's messy hair and baggy sport coat, and in its hand was a tiny book that said Botany. Does my hair really look that bad? He asked. Yes, said Lily, and I mean that in a good way. Everybody laughed. Now, if you get lonely, Aunt Lucy, said Rosie, you can have Michael visit you. Rosie walked the Michael doll up to the shop door. Said Aunt Lucy, too bad he doesn't have a box of chocolates in his other hand. Oops, guess we'll have to make a trip back to the old craft shop, Tess said, grinning. Actually, I would love to go back there, said Lily. There were some pretty lace doilies I could write poems on. And I could get more thread, said Rosie. Henry Bear's arm is still loose. And I'd like some big feathers, said Tess, for my next performance. Why don't we all go, said Michael, and I'll spring for ice cream on the way home. Great, said the girls. So everyone walked over to Vine Street and the old craft shop. This time, Petey wasn't riding on the rooster, so the street was very peaceful, and the girls were able to browse in the shop for a long time. Michael was very patient. He occupied himself with a box of miniature trains while everyone explored. Then, after stopping for ice cream, as promised, they all walked back to Michael's apartment for tea. Michael loved exotic teas, so the cousins always had to try something new and strange, like ginger licorice mint or maple tangerine. But the girls liked Michael so much that they didn't mind, and he always let them sit on his dragon bench with their teacups. When the cousins and Aunt Lucy finally returned home, everyone was so tired. They all wanted a nap. Aunt Lucy hugged each girl tight and thanked them all again for being such sweet angels. Then the cousins went up to the attic and snuggled into their own beds. Behind the long, lacy yellow curtains, Lily said, "Tomorrow I'll write everyone a little poem on a doily. And I, called Tess, will make us some crazy hats with big feathers." Things were quiet. Then Rosie said, "Let me know if anyone needs an arm sewn back on." Lily and Tess giggled and giggled. "I meant your toys," called Rosie, and everyone went to sleep with a smile. Please consider subscribing. And if you enjoyed this book, hit the
Try that again.